Our guest in this episode is Phillip Wylie. We explore the definition of pentesting, its relationship with red team activities, and the role of social engineering and ethical hacking. We discuss essential tools of the trade, and we get to hear an all-time favorite web app pentest hack from Phillip. Phillip also offers advice for starting a career in pen testing, including some insights from the book that he wrote, The Pentester Blueprint, Starting a Career as an Ethical Hacker. Towards the end, we examine the impact of AI on pen testing, and we think about where the field is headed in the next 5 to 10 years.
The Application Security Podcast is brought to you by Security Journey. Security Journey is an enterprise-class solution with lessons that are built on learning science principles to deliver long-term, measurable results. Learn more at securityjourney.com.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the Application Security Podcast. I'm Robert Hurlbut. I'm a Principal Application Security Architect at Acquia, as well as Threat Modeling Lead. And I'm joined by my co-host and longtime friend, Chris Romeo. Hey, Chris.
Hey, Robert. Chris Romeo, CEO of Davici, and excited to dive into the world of pen testing today, something that we don't talk about very often.
No, not very many times. I was thinking about some of our previous episodes over the years, and it's been a number of years now, and we haven't really covered this too often. So great to dive in and take a look. And our guest today is Phillip Wylie. Phillip, welcome.
Thanks. Great to be here. And it was nice meeting you during DEF CON.
Yeah, definitely. I've followed your work for a while. I've seen your name certainly float around and different things you're doing. And so it was a great opportunity to meet you. As you mentioned, we had breakfast there, and then we also got to walk around a little bit and see what was going on in the new venue there for DEF CON this year, which was actually very cool. I really enjoyed it. I was glad that they did that. It worked out well, I think.
So this was not the story that I thought you were going to tell about meeting at DEF CON. I was like, it was 3 a.m. We hadn't slept for 3 days, and we were hacking something that cannot be described in the building. Right. And then we jumped in the pool,
Right. Oh, the typical story. No, unfortunately, I wish it was maybe more exciting. Yeah, but no, it wasn't quite like that. But yeah, so again, we're glad to have you here. As we typically do in our podcast, we start out with our guest giving us your security origin story. So I want to start there. And if you could, let us know, how did you get into this great world of security?
Sure. Do you want the scenic route or the short story?
Whatever works. You tell us. Let's go the scenic route. I'd love to hear it.
Okay. Yeah, some people like to hear the story before I even got into security. So when I graduated high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do for a living. And I was a power lifter, and my friend said, "Hey, you should be a pro wrestler." So I went to wrestling school and wrestled for a couple years. And during that time, I actually wrestled a 750-pound bear.
Wow. So much I want to unpack here. I don't even want to talk about security now. So what is wrestling school? What is wrestling school? I didn't know this existed.
Oh yeah, there's all sorts back then. It wasn't as widely available, but I went to a wrestling school in downtown Dallas. It was in Doug's Gym, and it was ran by General Skandar Akbar, which was the gentleman's wrestling name that ran the school, which was pretty big back then. He had managed like Kamala at one time and some others. His organization he referred to as Devastation Incorporated.
So wrestling school. So it's like I'm imagining it's a gym and they've got a ring and they're teaching you different techniques and stuff so that you don't get hurt ultimately.
Yes. To teach you how to wrestle, because you have to learn how to pull punches. And the thing was, when I went into it, I had no idea what to expect, because back then it was before they admitted that it wasn't real. And so I thought, they're not going to let was thinking they're not going to let just anyone off the street come in and show them that it's not real, because if someone wanted to find out that time if it was real or not, all they had to do is send someone to a wrestling school and they could find out pretty quickly. I thought that, they wouldn't let you in on the secret right away, but right away they did. I was kind of going in, kind of wondering how it was going to be, if you had to kind of get really beat up and go through all this torturous initiation. But it really wasn't that way. You went in, they showed you how it was, how to protect yourself when you fall, and it was pretty interesting. So during that time, I wrestled Mick Foley. He was wrestling in Dallas as Cactus Jack. The first night I wrestled, the Rock and Roll Express, or actually the Midnight Express and the Road Warriors. The very first night I wrestled. Yeah.
Holy cow. And that's so crazy that, I'm guessing you always lost though. I remember the script.
Yes. Yeah. We were what they referred to as job boys or jobbers. So basically you went and lost all the time. I went to wrestling school with The Undertaker, and it was the same thing with him. Even though this guy was gigantic, he had to go through the same thing, paying your dues. The only people you really saw that didn't pay their dues were somehow related to people in the wrestling industry, just like Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. He had family there, so it wasn't like he had to go and get beat up and all that all the time. So, and that's usually the case. If you see someone starting out winning or not having to lose all the time, then they were related to someone somehow or another.
And so one last wrestling question. This is quickly becoming the wrestling podcast, but that's okay. Because I mean, come on, we grew up with wrestling. Like it was like on TV. I remember when it used to be on TBS, and there was the Iron Sheik, and I don't remember who all the people were there, but it was a big part of probably all of our childhoods, like as we were watching these things happen. So what was the craziest thing that happened to you in the ring?
Craziest thing, I say probably one of the scariest things is I wrestled the Samoan SWAT team. These were a couple of guys that are cousins to Dwayne Johnson. It was in a tag team match, and most people were pretty decent at pulling their punches. But the thing you have to consider about Samoans is they're all naturally large people. I mean, even the women are like 6 foot tall, 200 something pounds. So these two guys I was wrestling were probably about 350 and 6'3", 6'2", or something like that. Just really huge guys. And it was a tag team match. And I kind of noticed how my tag team partner got thrown in the ropes, and I saw like red hair flowing down, like where they'd had a hold of his hair and threw him in the ropes. And then wasn't too concerned until I got in there. They threw me in the corner and then just hit me in the jaw. And I mean, this was like full force, a normal, 200, 220 pound man would hit you with that kind of force. But this was their pulling punches. So when they threw me in the corner and hit me in the jaw, it's like, man, what did he do to piss them off? And so as the match progressed, I got suplexed off the top ropes, and he jumped off on me. And so there's a couple ways they do that. Typically, when people jump off the ropes, they fully, they break their fall. They don't really land full force on you. The way they did it is you start raising up. I didn't know that part. So he jumped off without trying to break his fall, landed on me full force, 350 pounds off of, the ropes for about 5 foot or so, jumping off this 5 foot surface and landing on me. And so the fall wasn't broken and knocked the wind out of me. So we got tagged out. The referee's trying to get me up so they can clear the ring out for the next match. I'd lost my breath, was winded, couldn't catch my breath. So I was sitting there trying to catch my breath, finally caught it. And when I was walking out of the ring, I was spitting up blood.
Oh man.
So that was scary. I kind of got off lucky because most people ended up with like whiplash or concussions that had wrestled these guys. Unfortunately, I came away with mine wasn't that bad. I think the spitting up blood, maybe I bit my cheek or something. I don't think it was anything too serious, but it was a scary experience. I mean,
so did they end the match like knowing you were injured, or was it supposed to end right there?
It was planned. That was their finishing move. That was planned, the planned ending. And so it worked out pretty well, because otherwise I would have been laying on the mat for a while if the match wasn't over.
I gotta imagine that there's a certain amount of improv though, when you're in the ring. Like if something, because like it's the show must go on, right? Like you can't just stop. Okay, cut. Let's take two. Everybody start again. Back to the dressing rooms. We're coming out again, right? Like you have to kind of flow and put on a good show. And so I'm imagining like there are times where things don't go as they're supposed to, and you just have to improv.
Yes. And there's a lot of improv to it to begin with, because a lot of people think that you practice beforehand, but wrestlers travel so much they don't have that opportunity to get together and s- try a couple times just a practice run of the match. It's like you're there in a locker room, you kind of discuss the finishing move, maybe some special moves that they have, because a lot of it's pretty typical. A lot of the falls are the same. So if they do like a hip toss or a body slam, it's all pretty much like a frontward roll, kind of a flip. So a lot of the falls are the same. And so, like I said, it's not, it's only planned what the ending is going to be, how long the match will be. And some wrestlers will have things where they'll tell you, if I squeeze your wrist twice, you reverse the move.
Mm.
So the matches I got lucky to do anything in, and just totally, instead of get totally slaughtered, my opponent would squeeze my wrist a couple times, and then I would reverse the hold on them or whatever. So
Fascinating.
Yes.
Wow. Okay, we should talk about security, application security
Yeah.
as well here. I mean, that's
Okay.
I could probably keep asking questions here, and we could fill a whole hour just
Yeah.
on your experiences in the world of wrestling. That's really cool. It's really neat. I'm
It
glad
is.
you went the scenic route, Robert. That was a good
I know, right? Who knew?
good decision there. So, Phillip, how about so here's the question: how do you transition from professional wrestling
Okay.
to security?
Well, so I got married in '89. I was actually got married in '88 and needed to had a better career, something with insurance, because I was wrestling maybe once a week if I was lucky. My full-time job was working as a bouncer, and that's where I wrestled the bear. So I needed a job with insurance and benefits. And so I'd worked several different jobs that did retail sales, construction. I hated construction, roofed houses, put up fences, framed houses, worked in restaurants and all this. And so finally one day I was watching television and saw an advertisement for the American Trades Institute, which was a trade school. One of the things they taught was AutoCAD. So I liked drawing when I was a kid, and I took some drafting classes in high school. And ultimately I wanted to go to CAD school because I had designed some exercise equipment. And I thought, yeah, this would be a cool job to get into, exercise equipment design. And so once I went through CAD school, found out the money was really not in designing exercise equipment. There were very few jobs in that area, and I followed the money. And so after working in the CAD industry for a while, I found out about sysadmin work, found out it paid more. I had more of a knack for it. When I was going through the trade school, I probably had some of the worst computer skills out of my class because I didn't have exposure to computers. The only thing I had experience with, we had a computer at home that my father-in-law gave us to use and played like Prodigy games, and that was it. And so I really didn't know how to use a computer. So going through classes, learning how to use a computer, getting out into the field, and then kind of figuring things out. Most of the places I worked at had Novell NetWare networks. And so one place I worked at, we'd got Windows 95, and the on-site IT person can figure out how to get Windows 95 to print through a Novell NetWare print server. So I was able to figure that out and taught myself how to build computers, took a Novell NetWare CNE certification course, which was like 90 days. After I completed that, I got my first job. It was during the .com boom. So I only interviewed for like one IT job and I got it. And it was basically building NetWare servers and upgrading from NetWare 3.12 to 4.11 and upgrading from Windows to Windows 95. And so that's kind of how I got my start. Did sysadmin roles for a little over 6 years, and moved into security in January of 2004. So the first year and a half I spent doing network security, did some vulnerability scanning, managed firewalls, intrusion detection systems. And then the company where I worked at, we hired a new CISO. He had a more modern idea of the way things were done in security, and he put us in different silos. And fortunately, I got put in application security. So I spent from about September 2005 to March of 2012 working application security. I got laid off from my job, applied for a role consulting at Verizon as a penetration tester, and that's kind of where I got my start there. But a big part of my career was spent in application security. Application security is where I learned about pen testing, and pen testing is the one role I've been in the longest in cybersecurity. So I've been on the offensive side for a little over 12 years. Previous to that, the longest time, my longest role in security was application security from like September 2005 to March 2012.
So pen testing, I think, is the primary thing that we want to explore here with some different angles on it, perhaps. But I think it would be beneficial to define pen testing because uh, this is one of those terms that everybody thinks or seems to think that they know exactly what it is and that we all agree. But I think there is some differences of interpretation, I guess, of that definition. So when you think penetration testing, what's your definition, and how does red teaming, blue teaming, any other teaming kind of fit into that and intersect?
Sure. So penetration testing is assessing the security from a threat actor perspective. And some of the misconceptions there's a lot of confusion between red teaming and pen testing. With pen testing, you're going in using different type of hacker techniques to assess the security of a system. So you're trying, the most common things is hacking into a computer wise. You can use social engineering to try to hack the human element of it. You can even get into physical building security, trying to break into buildings. And, originally pen testing was more full scope. Had all things typically in the rules of engagement or in scope for the pen test. Social engineering was used a lot more often. Actual phishing without, not the tools where you send out the monthly test to see if someone clicks on something, but you really don't know what happens if they click on a payload. So it was kind of really more full scope. PCI really changed the way things were being done. Scopes were so narrow. Only certain environments were being left out. Certain techniques were left out. So it got down to where, pen testing was really more towards the computer hacking side of things. One of the things to describe too is you're using ethical hacking skills within a penetration test. Sometimes people call it ethical hacking, but that is part of the things that you use in a penetration test. So you can do ethical hacking without necessarily being a pen test. A lot of the confusion with the red teaming comes because people think that pen testing is red teaming and they get confused. So if you hear someone that creates course content or tries to create a course or books on red teaming or like on pen testing that don't know any better, they think it's more like red teaming. You're trying to go undetected and all this, and that's not the case. Pen tests are sometimes referred to as a time box test. So you got a limited amount of time. Everyone really needs to know in an organization what's going on in case something breaks, can be fixed. That way they can tell the difference between malicious and legit offensive security activities going on. So that needs to be reported. With the red team operation, the control group is the only one that knows. Typically the CISO, maybe a few managers, because you're not really going to tip off the blue team because you're also testing the response of the blue team, not just the technology. Whereas in the pen test, it's more focused on technology unless you're doing social engineering. And it's also testing like the incident response plan with the red team operation. So you're testing to see if people are following that. If a company has incident response, are they following it? One of the best outcomes that I've really heard of from a red team operation was this company had an incident response company on retainer in case they had an incident. A red team operation was going on. The blue team detected it, called this company. They came in to investigate and try to stop the attack and so forth. And they'd call the CISO up and say, hey, we've got a breach going on. We've got the incident response team in. And that's kind of the way you want it to happen. That way they detected it. Sometimes these EDRs, different endpoints aren't tuned well enough, and just the noise of everything drowns out legitimate malicious activity. So this is the kind of outcome that you want to see. One of the best descriptions I heard for red teaming was by the founder of Dallas Hackers Association that goes under the handle Wirefall. His description is the red team tests the blue team.
Yeah, that's a good way to summarize it in such a close, such a tight definition. I'm always curious when people do pen testing and red teaming as to understand, like, what are some of the best stories of things that you've accomplished in that? Like, what were some of the coolest things? And I know sometimes you end up doing, spending 15 minutes and, and being able to get into somebody's system, and it's not as cool as in the movies, but like,
Yeah.
can you share one or two examples of some of the cool things that you've seen, and maybe some of the most unique uh, attack vectors
Sure.
you've been able to exploit?
One of my favorite all-time hacks, and actually my license plate kind of is SQL injection related. But at any rate, one of my favorite all-time hacks is I was actually out of town up in Mississippi visiting family. My mom was actually was in the hospital there, so I was visiting. And then one night working from the hotel, I was doing an application pen test, and I was doing my burp suite scans, and found that the application may be vulnerable to a SQL injection vulnerability. So I was doing manual validation validation with SQL map. And sure enough, it was vulnerable to SQL injection. They had XP command shell enabled, and I was able to get command line access to the system, dump the password hash, and crack it with John the Ripper in less than 30 seconds. This was back in 2014. So Hashcat wasn't as popular then. Maybe it was just coming around, but I was able to crack the password hash in like 30 seconds or less. And the password was password, all lowercase, and the number 1. Yeah, they had XP command shell running, which allowed it and open to the internet. And the most ridiculous thing was, and this is one of the things I really preach to people on pen test, pen tests are worthless if you don't do the remediation. You can't just check the box each year and expect to be secure. You're only going to improve your security posture if you act on the results of that pen test. And this company come up and say, yeah, we were aware of that vulnerability, but we're going to file a risk acceptance because it's a development server.
I wish I knew who that was. Don't tell me, because
Yeah.
just so I can make sure.
Actually,
we're not doing business.
I don't even remember who it is now, but
So the dev server was exposed, right? So it was,
yes.
So, but it's just the dev server.
100%.
Yeah.
It's all good. It's all good.
Yeah.
Vulnerability.
And I guarantee you it wasn't segmented from the production environment. And the only thing in scope was that application. So you really couldn't, if this would have been a regular external pen test, then we could have, tried to see if we could do lateral movement or privilege escalation or so forth, try to gain access to other systems. And, especially 2014, it's bad enough now that a lot of system accounts and administrator accounts are, they, reuse passwords, and it's probably a good opportunity that there was another server using the same credentials.
So you mentioned SQL injection. I'm always curious to understand from somebody like you who sees lots of different systems and tests different things. It seems like, based on the mitigations available, that we should be getting better from a SQL injection perspective, because we have ORMs, we have awareness of SQL injection. Like, it seems like it shouldn't be as easy as it used to be. But I'm curious, is that what you're seeing in the field as you're doing new tests these days, or is SQL injection still as rampant as it was in 2014?
No, it's gotten better in some of the cases. If you see something vulnerable, you really can't do much. You may luckily get some data exposure if you're really lucky. To gain, system control is very less likely nowadays. But it's getting better, but you still see some of it.
Okay. And are you seeing SSRF, for example, as, it made its way to the OWASP top 10 for, when was the last one? 21? Whatever the last,
21.
Yeah, whatever the last revision. SSRF was kind of the futuristic item. They pick a futuristic one and add it each time. Are you seeing, has that in 4 or 5 years, has that become something that you're seeing a lot, or is it still futuristic?
I'm not seeing a lot of it.
Okay. So it's not something that's, that's interesting that, it was kind of a guess with it within the OWASP top 10, as far as this is something that could be. Is there anything that you're seeing new in the last couple of years that you're tracking that, most folks might not be aware of?
Yeah, nothing really that I can really that comes to mind. But one of the things that I think that's worth mentioning, especially from a pen test perspective, while applications are kind of getting a little bit better, but one of the things too, from internal pen test perspective, application weakness vulnerabilities are one of the ways that it's easiest to gain a foothold internally, because a lot of the pen tests I've done, I've went in, a lot of these EDRs are getting a lot more secure. It's hard to gain a foothold, but if you go in and they're running, and this is where you really see the weaknesses, because a lot of these administrative consoles for security and IT tools use like a Java server, like Apache Tomcat or Red Hat JBoss. And sometimes these aren't really that secure. So sometimes that's a good way for a pen tester to get a foothold. Sometimes they're vulnerable to file upload. You're able to upload a malicious file. Sometimes they're using default credentials, and you're able to gain access with that way where otherwise trying to get a foothold in. And that's why a lot of cases, that's a popular method of pen testing that I really like out there is, a lot of cases in the past, you went on site to do a pen test, you're doing an uncredentialed, unauthenticated pen test for network pen test. You're not able to gain a foothold. In a lot of cases in the past, people call it good right up on the pen test report. But what happens if you're an insider threat? What happens if you gain access to some credentials? Someone either password on a sticky note or throws away the sticky note, passwords are reused, and someone finds a password dump on the dark web or whatever, because a lot of the ways as pen testers we're getting any kind of foothold externally now is finding these password dumps. So internally, the password reuse and that kind of stuff. So the assumed breach, typically this was like a white box pen test in application pen testing where you had credentials, you do an authenticated test. Doing that on a network has a lot of value, because otherwise, if you're not able to get in through the black box approach, you're not truly secure. And then also the same vulnerabilities that are used for ransomware. If someone clicks on a malicious file and affects the company of the ransomware, these are authenticated users. So we need to really test authenticated on the network, taking a tip from, application pen testing like we've been doing for years.
I wanted to circle back on, you mentioned social engineering, and I was curious about that in terms of how does that get framed into the engagements? Is that, because you said mostly it's technical, but is that, mostly physical where you're interacting with people and trying to do something, or could it be also technical with emails and other kinds of things? How does that typically factor into an engagement?
Yes, it's mostly going to be email, but sometimes calls, phishing, where you call up someone, and because these type of methods need to be tested going back to ransomware, and a lot of these different breaches, a lot of the footholds are through phishing emails or vishing. Someone calls up and persuades someone to give them credentials. Back when I was consulting, one of the tricks we would pull is we would create a website to look like a support site for that company and convince someone from that company to go in and log in using their corporate credentials to capture their credentials. So it's something that really needs to be used. I think sometimes it doesn't get used enough. And one of the things I think people mistake is using the phishing campaign applications where basically you just send out an email and it's really taking metrics of who's clicking on it, not testing security awareness. We really need to be putting payloads in those emails. What happens if someone clicks on a payload? What is, available from there? I think too many people think we're just going to use these campaigns and that's good enough, which is not. You're training people, and then people also within the IT organization and security organization. We did this at a company I used to work at. We knew what not to click on, but we don't want to be bothered with it. We'd set up rules that if this came through, it would send it to trash, because, there's certain headers and information, URLs that some of these websites used that you're able to go through, put it in there and just direct it to your trash file and a trash bucket and not mess with it. So it's too easy to game. So I think that stuff has its place for security awareness, but you've got to build in some good old school phishing campaigns within those campaigns.
And with
So if we think,
payloads, like I said.
yeah. So if we think about tools of the trade, you mentioned Burp, you mentioned SQL Map. I'm curious, what are your 5 top tools that you use for every test?
It's going to depend. If there's any kind of web services in there, I'm using Burp Suite. I'll use Zap too, because one of the things, sometimes vulnerability scanners will find something that others don't. So I'll just run Zap as a secondary to see if it finds something that maybe Burp Suite didn't find. Metasploit, if I find anything exploitable. It's also good at discovering like FTP vulnerabilities. It's got its auxiliary scanners, so Metasploit's really good. And probably Nmap is my main go-to tool, because after I run a vulnerability tool like scanner like Nessus, then I go in and validate those vulnerabilities, because it's one of the things people listening, that when you do a pen test, that's kind of the difference between a vulnerability scan and like even on a vulnerability assessment, you're validating those vulnerabilities to make sure they're not false positives. Because a lot of times these vulnerability scanners will find false positives. So my go-to tool for validation is like Nmap. There's a lot of Nmap scripting engine scripts or NSE scripts that look for these particular vulnerabilities, just like Log4j and some of the different vulnerabilities. You can run those to see if those systems are vulnerable. And so that's one of the tools I run that quite a bit. And then just a lot of the different tools within that comes installable or pre-installed on Kali Linux or Parrot OS. Another tool I think is really good too is Nuclei is a good command line vulnerability scanner. I used to use Nick2 a lot, which actually Project Discovery, one of the folks that wrote Nick2 is contributing to Project Discovery, but Nick2 was good. I used to see a lot of people downplay the effectiveness, but I found things with Nick2 that Burp Suite or Nessus didn't find on pen tests. So it's a really quick find. You see any kind of web services running on a system, you just run that from the command line, and you can find things like default credentials or easily guessed credentials. And
yeah, that's you're making me nostalgic now. It's it seems like Nick2 is, I remember that from 10, 15 years ago as being like the type was like one of the top tools, but it's one of those things. People move on and tools end up going onto the shelf and not being updated and whatnot, and new things, but it gives an opportunity for new things to come onto the scene as well. So.
Yes. Yeah.
But Nmap is the one that's been around. I think Nmap's been around almost as long as I have.
Yeah.
In security. And like, I got a lot of gray hair at this point. So, I mean, I've been around for a while, and I remember it in the early days, still doing, the same basic things it did in those days.
Yeah. Plus they keep evolving. That's one of the things that's out of all the open source free pen testing tools or security tools out there. It's like one of the longest maintained. And then each summer they do this thing where people, try to write different, add-ons to it and enhancements, and it keeps evolving. They keep doing good things with it. I mean, some cases people come out with other scanners that may be faster, but people may do their discovery with other scanners, but then they're going back to Nmap when they're really digging, looking for the services and vulnerabilities.
So let's shift a little bit. I know that you've done some work with helping people get into this great field, and I mentioned some of our listeners are hearing this saying, "Oh, wow, that's really cool. That's something I'd like to do." But what's your advice to others? To how would they start? How would they get into this, or even pen test related fields or careers?
Yeah, one of the things I would recommend is you're going to have the basic skills to begin with. So if you're starting out totally new, then you need to understand operating systems and networking. And what could be a good place to start there is Professor Messer has some free YouTube videos based on the Security Plus, Network Plus, I think maybe it's A Plus. So start out learning the basics. Once you kind of get a grasp on operating systems and networking, then you can move on to something like TryHackMe. TryHackMe has some free and low cost memberships. I think it's like $15 a month or something like that. And there's a lot of free content. So I would start out there, build the basics up. Kind of when you get a good basic foundation built, then I would go on to like Hack the Box Academy, because Hack the Box Academy has some really good educational content there. A lot of it is you need kind of some basic IT skills. And so that goes all the way from like a beginner level up to really advanced. They've got some IoT and ICS related content on there. And so it's really good content. The people that oversee that, the director there, Demetrios, he used to be at eLearn Security. So it's similar. Some of the content is similar to eLearn Security without the videos, which I kind of like. Videos are nice, but sometimes you're doing a video course, you're watching the video, then you have to keep rewinding it. I kind of like where the content is in print. So you can go through and look at the content and go back and forth and read the steps instead of keep replaying the video. TCM Academy has some good low cost training. As far as application security, Rana Khalil. So if you're familiar with Portswigger's Web Application Security Academy, Rana Khalil developed training for that. So she's got a paid course and free. So you can access her training for free on YouTube. And the nice thing about it is she does walkthroughs of the different challenges within the Portswigger Web Application Security Academy. And if you watch the longer form videos, she shows you how to solve the labs using Python script. So it's really, really good companion to that already great free training resource. People without the experience is definitely, I would recommend using that. Someone that understands things a little bit more may not need that help, but I think it's a good companion to that.
So we want to just mention and hear a little bit more about the book that you wrote, The Pentester Blueprint, Starting a Career as an Ethical Hacker. Is this biographical in that you're kind of telling your story, or what is somebody gonna get out of this book?
Yeah, what people can get out of this book, where it came from, is I used to teach at Dallas College. So I taught pen testing and web app pen testing there for 3 years and 8 months. And that book was based on the lecture I gave at the beginning of the semester. So I started teaching there in January of 2018. And I did this first day presentation, sharing with my students what pen testing entails, what kind of certifications and the type of skills you need to become a pen tester. So by November 2018, I turned it into a talk and gave it our local B-Sides, our B-Sides Dallas Fort Worth conference, and then started giving it at a lot of conferences after that. And I was in the Tribe of Hackers Red Team book, and Wiley Publishing asked me if I had any ideas about books. And one of the things I saw every time I gave this talk, it was always a new crowd. A lot of people hadn't heard of it. I could go out today and give that talk somewhere, and there'd be a lot of people that didn't hear of it. And I knew the only way to get this important content out to people is through a book, because people could go to the library, rent check out the book. They could buy it online. They can find that book. And it's not based on me or my connections to be able to share it. But what the book does is based on, even beyond that lecture, some of the experiences I had mentoring students and mentoring friends and people in the industry to become pen testers. So I'm sharing my experience, what I did, as well as what I recommend to others to become pen testers. Before I started teaching, I used to share resources on that I thought were valuable for prepping for the OSCP certification. So I was constantly sharing these resources. So when it came to the book, I kind of told people how to build the basics, the basic fundamentals, what you needed to know, some topics around cybersecurity, some of the trainings that are helpful, as well as certifications helpful for being a pen tester. So it's not teaching you how to be a pen tester. It's just kind of teaching you what you need to know and kind of pointing a direction. There's lots of great books out there on pen testing, but no one was really saying, yeah, you need to understand networking and operating systems. Someone would go to a Barnes and Noble, pick up, a book on pen testing, but they're totally missed out on all this prerequisite stuff. So I share with them prerequisites and how to build that base, and then resources on learning pen testing.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I want to throw something at you here, and not in regards to kind of building a career. I think that's great. I think and people that listen to the show all the time know Robert and I are always looking for resources to point people to, and because we just need more people in our industry, right? Like that's just the reality.
Definitely.
People can argue about how many people we need or how many jobs are empty, but we know that there's a need, and that the need's going to continue to grow. So I think that's awesome that you wrote that book to help people make that transition. But this, as our listeners will know, I'm about to have a soapbox moment, because I have a number of soapbox issues or whatnot. And I guess it's a bit of a pet peeve of mine. And I'm curious to get your perspective as somebody who's helping people, is an accomplished pen tester, but also helping people, make their journey into it. And the pet peeve I have is talk to a college kid, right? That's focused on cybersecurity. And I'll ask him, he or she, what's your focus? Like, what do you want to do with your degree? Oh, I want to break stuff. I want to hack things. I want to be a pen tester. I'd say 70 to 80% of people that I ask that question to, that's their answer. And my challenge with that has always been pen testing is something we need. It is a control that helps us to validate all of the things that we've done earlier in the life cycle. If we put more effort onto the building side to securely building things, we wouldn't find as many things later in the game. But do you have this same experience, like when you talk to college students, for example, and that's what they want to do? And how do you wrestle with this issue?
Yeah, that's one of the things too, because what do you see in the movies? Even I forget the movie now. I think it was called Firewall that Harrison Ford was in.
Yeah.
And all these security roles are always hacker focused. It's always, and that's what entices people. It seems sexy and cool. I think if more people knew what pen testing really entailed, they wouldn't be as interested in it because there's some boring things that go along with it. It's not always just hacking. Sometimes you're going through validating things like TLS and SSL related vulnerabilities that are super boring, but you've got to validate those. Then you have to write the reports. And then sometimes you have to work these crazy hours. I had customers when I was consulting, I had a large airlines that I tested, and my hours of testing was from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. And, most companies you can't test until after. And if it's like just a national company in the US and they're doing business on the West Coast, then you can't test until 6 p.m. West Coast time and some of that. So I think really people need to get more exposure to the different areas. And one story I like to share was one of my former coworkers when I worked at US Bank. I actually had him on my podcast, my previous podcast. And when I was talking to him, he started out there on the help desk and he was taking SANS courses for digital forensics. So he had taken several SANS courses, really loved it. And he decided, okay, the next class I'm going to take the GPen, their basic pen testing, network pen testing course, because he thought I could be a better digital forensics analyst if I understand how the hacker mind works. He took the course and fell in love with it. And now he's been pen testing for like 8 years now, something like that. And the thing to say is someone else that's interested in pen testing may take a forensics course. They may find out about threat hunting, incident response, and they may love that and like that a lot more. So I really think they need to go to conferences and different meetups, set in on some different talks and kind of get to learn the different areas before they dive into one. And the thing is too, is maybe your end goal is to be a pen tester, but any sysadmin work you do, any defensive security work you do is going to help you be a better pen tester, because one of the things I share in the book is you have to understand the technology before you can secure it. And to break into it, you need to understand the security. So once you build those fundamentals, you can move to pen testing one day if you want to. And another thing to consider too is other fields like IT. If you're starting out as a database administrator and you wanted to go over to managing networks on Cisco devices, that's a total retrain. The experience you have is going to be very limited. Maybe understanding some ports that Microsoft SQL or Oracle uses, that's very limited. But within the pen testing realm or cybersecurity, say you start out in GRC, if you work in GRC for a while and go to be a pen tester, you're going to be a lot better pen tester because you're going to understand how to work with auditors, how to work with compliance, and kind of take some of those methodology and build it into your pen testing methodology, and you're going to be better at it. So all this builds on each other in security. If you decide to move to something else, and you don't always stay there. Some people move out as pen testing because it's not always the best money. Some people move into management or other roles to be able to make more money. I've heard stories of people going back to working in IT because there are IT roles they can make better money at than pen testing. The problem with pen testing, there's still good salaries out there, but one of the things it does is so flooded because everyone wants to do the job. There's a lot more competition for the job. And at the same time too, some people are so desperate to do it. There's some of these people that are kind of bringing down the salaries because you got someone that, oh, I'd happy to be a pen tester for $50,000. And whenever you figure entry level fair price should be about $80,000, but you got people that do it for less. I mean, I would say one of the things, yes,
there's more people in that functional role. So it sounds like you're seeing the effects of what I've had as a hypothesis, that too many people are focused on it. And
yes.
So that's driving market rates down for what people can get paid for doing it.
Yes. I'm not sure how broad spread that is, but just seeing how because at the end of the day, companies are trying to negotiate cheap salaries with people. I mean, and so if you're going to take this job for $30,000 less than someone else, and then you take someone that's doing a total career change that, maybe they weren't even working in technology. They go out and get some pen testing certifications. They were making $40,000, at this other company, $10,000, $20,000 bump in pay is a lot for them. And, companies, they're going to want quality, but there are going to be some cases where for entry level roles, they're just looking for someone cheap.
Yeah, that's why I encourage I say kids, these college students, but I'm old enough that they're kids, and just encouraging them, like, look at AppSec as a potential alternative to going down the pen testing route, because we have even more of a shortage on the AppSec side. It's going to continue to be a hotter and hotter area as people start to understand more about it. And so I encourage them, learn an object-oriented language, pair that with all the things you can learn about cybersecurity from whatever university program you're going through, and broaden your scope a little bit and look for an entry-level AppSec role. Yes, they're going to make you run tools and stuff probably in that entry-level AppSec role. It's usually unfortunately, that's what those often tend to be is, well, you're the person that runs the SaaS tool. But you can grow out of that as well and grow to a deeper, you can increase your role and become an AppSec engineer, which I think is just an opportunity.
Another thing too, if you like to break things you want to hack, and you, like you said, start an entry level AppSec role, do bug bounty. In working AppSec roles, you may get to do some pen testing. So there's ways to kind of fill that need without necessarily have to be full-time pen testing role.
Yeah. How is another, just off the top of my head, but I'm really curious about this because you mentioned bug bounty. How has bug bounty changed the world of pen testing?
It's kind of interesting because I think if you're like a bug hunter, if you actually do bug bounty, I think it would make you be a better pen tester, because one of the things I like to compare, I used to be a bug crowd ambassador, and I always told students and mentees, if you want to get into pen testing, then you can get actual hands-on experience, through bug bounty. But one of the things I like to describe for people to understand bug bounty is also crowdsourced pen testing. But the difference between bug bounty and pen testing is you get paid regardless of how good a job you do, if you find bugs or not. With bug bounty, you only get paid if you find things. And I think it'll make you a better pen tester, because the way I like to describe it is, if you fish for sport compared to fishing to be able to feed yourself, the person that has to feed themselves from fishing is going to be a better fisherman, because you find fish or you starve. If you're doing it for fun, you're not going to try so hard.
Yeah.
I think it's the same thing with bugs, finding vulnerabilities.
That's a good that's a good analogy. I like that. I might borrow that and give you attribution the first or second time that I say. After that, it'll be something that just kind of, that.
Yeah.
Oh, I think, Phillip, we could talk about a number of different areas here, but we're kind of running out of time for this episode, so we'll have to do another one. But we can't move forward until we do the lightning round, which Robert is, I don't know if he's famous or infamous for the lightning
Infamous,
round.
probably, at this point. All right. Yes, we have 3 questions that we typically ask. So first is, what's your most controversial opinion on application security or pen testing or anything related? And why do you hold that view?
Well, I was going to say probably my most controversial is risk acceptance. I think there's a time and a place for it, but we can't use it for an excuse. Risk acceptance may work in the organization, but threat actors don't care if you have risk acceptance. And I see people abuse it. So we really need to use it when it's needed to be used, but don't abuse it, because it's understandable sometimes. Yeah, you're not going to be able to fix this in the 90-day allotted time that's in your policy, but at least try to, get it fixed within a reasonable time. Use those as needed and not abuse those.
And next is, if you could display a message on a billboard at the RSA or Black Hat conference, what would it say?
Be kind.
Love that. And then finally, what's your top book recommendation and why do you find it valuable?
I'd say my top book recommendation would be the Web Application Hacker's Handbook, because it is like one of the most comprehensive web application security and web app pen testing resources. I mean, it goes in deep in depth, and as actually a lot of the content was updated on Portswigger's Web Application Security Academy because they did that instead of rewriting the book. But that's one of the best resources. It goes into, I can't think of another book that goes into as much detail about application security or application pen testing than that book.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Phillip, I know you do podcasts and whatnot. I want to make sure our listeners know where else they can find you before we go to your key takeaway. So what podcasts are you doing right now?
Yes. So my podcast is the Phillip Wylie Show. I previously did the Hacker Factory podcast, but last year I went independent. And so you can find me at phillipwylieshow.com. I'm on all popular podcast platforms, including YouTube. And you can find me on Twitter, formerly Twitter, under Phillip Wylie, and LinkedIn. And I'm always happy to answer questions and do mentoring. I have calls with people from time to time. They just want to kind of get some career advice. I'll go over their LinkedIn profile or resumes and just kind of give them advice. And
Very cool. Very cool. So as far as a key takeaway or a call to action, what do you want to leave our audience with?
yeah, I would say continue to learn. Don't get comfortable and just continue to learn and kind of follow your curiosity and passion. That's kind of what got me into pen testing within my career. I never really followed the money. It was really just following what interested me. And then fortunately worked out to where it was areas that paid decent. So just kind of continue to learn and follow your curiosity and passion.
Awesome. Phillip, thank you for sharing your wisdom, your stories, and I can't wait to see you at a conference because I want to hear a lot more of the wrestling stories that we just ran out of time for, but I think that's fascinating. So I will find you at an event in the future, and
I'll come to Triangle Con and
maybe I'll see you there, and
I'll be there.
I'd love to hear some more of those stories because that's just fascinating. That world is fascinating to me that you've had that experience in. So. But thanks for all you do. Thanks for sharing your wisdom. And we'll have you on again in the future. Talk about something else.
Thanks for having me on. Thanks for having me on, Chris. It was great to meet you in person. And Robert, great to see you virtually.
Same.